This reading is from the Holy Gospel according to the tradition of St. Matthew. Jesus came from Galilee to John at the Jordan to be baptized by him. John tried to prevent him, saying, "I need to be baptized by you, yet you are coming to me." Jesus said to him in reply, "Allow it now, for thus it is fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness." Then he allowed him. After Jesus was baptized, he came up from the water, and behold, the heavens were opened for him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and coming upon him. And a voice came from the heavens saying, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." The Gospel of the Lord. One of the topics that has probably been most discussed through the 20th century, and while will probably continue to be discussed well into the 21st century, is centered around the question of identity. People do struggle with their identity, with who they are. And identity questions, oftentimes, the response to them can make the difference between wonderful mental health and sometimes tragic consequences. Who are we? Who are we as human beings? Who am I as a particular person? And people will give a variety of responses to that question. Some people would simply identify themselves by their work. So they'll say, well, I'm a restaurateur, I'm a developer, I'm a lawyer, I'm a priest, I'm a housewife, I'm a secretary, etc. So some people, their identity is primarily their work. For other people, their identity may actually be their geography. Who am I? I'm a Western New Yorker, or I'm a Floridian, or I'm from the Midwest, or something. Their place actually has something radical to do with their identity. For some people, their identity is almost totally held in their family. I'm the son of Fred and Marjorie. I have 4 brothers and sisters, etc. So people, that's another way of looking at it. As far as the government is concerned, I'm 12737, my Social Security number. So basically, I'm a number as far as government goes. But we all find something to kind of identify us in some particular kind of way. I'm assuming everyone here, one of the claims to identity we could make is, I'm a Roman Catholic Christian. That's my identity. But how central is that identity to you? Well, baptism is the sacrament that invites us into the experience of the people of God as church, and very deeply into the very person of Jesus Christ. And baptism is our way of saying your primary identity is that of a child of God. Your primary identity is one of, in fact, a creation of God. Your primary identity is one that enables you to hold the very gifts of God's Spirit within you. So baptism is our sacrament of publicly acknowledging our identity as Christians. The truth is, it is as Christians. It is not as Catholics. For example, in the Catholic Church today, if you were a Presbyterian or a Lutheran or an Episcopalian or a Methodist, any other church that baptizes, and you decided to become a Catholic, we would not rebaptize you. And we don't do that because baptism isn't into a religion. Baptism is into a person, Jesus Christ. That's what it means to be a Christian, a follower of the Christ. And so, and truth be told, all those different religious traditions that identify themselves as Christian, on the level of dogma, pretty much hold the same thing. They all believe in a Trinitarian God. They all believe that Jesus is the Redeemer. They all believe that the Spirit of God is, in fact, a continuing gift to us, etc., etc. And oftentimes, most of their differences are solely on the level of church polity, how they're organized and unfold their lives. So baptism is this kind of radical commitment of identity. But at the same time, it seems strange to say that because at least in our church, 99.9% of all the people we baptize are babies. They're infants. And I've yet to find any parent, when I've asked them the question, did your child ask you to go to church today so that they could be baptized, have told me yes. No baby looks at their parent and says that. In other words, these children who are being baptized have made no decision to belong to Christ. And that's why baptism is actually a sacrament for their parents. Because the parents and the godparents are the ones who are asked to be decisive. The first question in baptism is, what's the name of your child? The second question is, why are you here? And the third question is, well, since you named your child and you're here for baptism, are you willing to accept the responsibility of training them in the practice of the faith? That's the big commitment. It's really the parents' commitment. And then we look at the godparents and we say, and godparents, will you help these parents in their duty as Christian mother and father? Now, unfortunately, for a lot of people, something like a godparent is just kind of a chance to involve somebody in a social action that they've never participated in before. So I've actually had Catholics come and tell me that they find it very difficult to find a godparent because they don't know anybody in their family who's a practicing Catholic anymore. So that basically, in other words, at least people sometimes have a sense of the importance of this responsibility, but sometimes they don't. They think of it as simply a social action. I've even had people who ask if godparents could come forward who were Buddhists or Jewish or Hindus. They're supposed to help you make a Christian commitment. Why would you ask somebody who's not a Christian to be a godparent? So people just sometimes aren't even thinking about the significance and importance of this kind of responsibility. But with the revision of the rite of baptism, it's pretty clear that all the responsibility is on the parents. Now, no parent can make their child a Christian. What they're doing is they're simply sharing their faith life with their children, hopefully that they'll affirm that themselves when they get to an age where they can do it. We, in fact, have separated in Roman Catholicism two sacraments that were once one sacrament, baptism. In the early church, the only people who were baptized were adults, and the only adults that were baptized were males. Whatever the head of the family became, the rest of the family automatically was part of. That changed after about 100 years in our faith tradition. And so we now have another sacrament, confirmation, which the very word means to confirm what the parents and godparents did when you were a baby. Now you confirm that as an adult. And usually in our church, for example, this decision is usually being made around the junior and senior year of high school, when at least people are arriving at an age where they can intelligently for themselves know the basic commitment that is faith and hopefully wish to confirm it and affirm what they've had been shared, what has been shared with them by their parents. But in any case, baptism is our answer to the identity question. We don't give a number, and we don't define ourselves wholly by our relationship within family or local geography or even work. Our baptism is ultimately the key to our identity. And in fact, I remember years ago when I was rector of the seminary writing an article in the seminary publication about the fact that the most important sacrament is not priesthood. The most important sacrament is baptism. That begins the story. That begins the journey. But it's a sacrament that has to keep on giving. It has to be constantly reaffirmed. That's why when you walk into any Catholic church, as you did this morning for Mass, what's the first thing you usually face when you walk into that church, besides hopefully the friendly and happy face of an usher or greeter? What you their first face is a holy water font filled with the water of baptism. You touch it, you sign yourself in the cross. That's meant to be a persistent reminder to you that in order to be church, you need to keep the promises of your baptism. It's the sacrament that's meant to kind of keep on giving over the years in terms of its reminder of what we need to live up to. In the early church, there was a huge argument around baptism. an argument between two of the greatest apostles in the history of the church, Peter and Paul. Peter lost the argument. Paul won. Peter thought that in order to become a Christian, baptism wasn't enough. You had to become a Jew first, because Jesus was a Jew. And so he thought you could only get to Jesus through Moses. And so he thought you needed to keep the dietary rituals of the Jewish tradition. If you were a male, you needed to be circumcised, etc. And so he was willing to accept non-Jews into the Christian faith, but only if they first became Jews. Paul said, no way. He said, this faith is meant for everyone, and you shouldn't need to pass through some other faith on the way to it. And so he said, baptism is the key. And no other restriction should be placed upon those who wish to be a Christian. And that question was resolved at something we now call the First Council of the Church, the Council of Jerusalem, in favor of St. Paul. And to Peter's credit, he underwent a kind of conversion of spirit himself as he began to experience Gentile people and their sincerity and their desire to live out their faith, and in fact, in his time, even to be martyrs for that faith. So today, on this last day of the Christmas season, when we celebrate the feast of the baptism of the Lord, it's important, I think, that we remind ourselves of our own baptism. Most of us have no personal memory of that unless we were baptized as an adult. But we need, therefore, to constantly remind ourselves promises were made, and those promises need to be kept. And those promises we need to fulfill in our ongoing experience of life. The truth is, we'll probably never meet all those promises perfectly in this human experience. And so we will need the grace of God ultimately to help us enter his kingdom. But we should be about recognizing this basic identity that we have as Christians, as those who've decided that in Jesus Christ we see an example of what we should be as human beings. And in and through his redemptive love, we are called home ultimately to the life of God. Hopefully our persistent reminder of that will guide us in our own personal development and wherever possible in the opportunities we have for leading others into that kingdom. If you picked up the Buffalo Evening News this morning, on the front page is a huge story about the change going on in the church, especially what will be going on in our diocese. I might be the last pastor you have in this parish. The other parishes will be soon having pastoral administrators. Lay people will now take over the leadership of the church in terms of day-to-day administration. I'm so happy about that. I no longer have to worry about the gutters and the roofs and the boilers and all of those kinds of things. That won't be part of my world, not a world that I was actually prepared for anyway. But the unlikelihood is a church this size and this parish will continue to have a priest. And I think the smaller parishes first will probably experience this change. But I grew up at a time when almost every year, probably between the mid-1940s up until the mid-70s, we were ordaining almost 20 men a year to be priests in this diocese. Now it takes us 20 years to ordain 20 men. And all those big classes are now coming up for retirement. Father John retired just now at the end of this year. We never retire from being priests. We simply retire from administration. And we'll still be, hopefully, all of us continuing to celebrate Mass and hear confessions and anoint the sick, etc. The very things we were prepared for in our seminary experience. And so that story in the paper today is an important one to read and to ponder. And it's going to unfold in a graduated way, I'm sure, over the years as we experience a new structure. But it does not affect baptism. It doesn't affect the commitment to follow Jesus Christ. It doesn't affect the promises that are important. It's always important to make a distinction between essentials and accidentals. And these things are accidental. They can change in lots of ways over the years, the way we structure ourselves. What should not change is our commitment to be faithful to what we've learned in and through Jesus Christ, and be attempting to live that out each day. I also expect that on Thursday of this coming week, there'll probably be another front page story in the Buffalo Evening News, and it will be about Catholic schools. Since on Wednesday, the bishop will make an announcement about what schools will be closing and what will remain open, and why this is happening and the reasons for it. And we'll see how we're affected by that story as that unfolds. Another story of a change of structure, but not a story about what's essential, baptism. Not a story about what you signed yourself with when you entered church today. There are lots of different ways in which each of us can be guided into the experience of Jesus Christ. And we probably haven't even begun to imagine the ways in which we can do that. And hopefully, as change occurs, which is always difficult, all of us will make an effort to be more faithful to the baptism and the promises that we made, that our parents made, and that our godparents made years ago, that in fact have brought us here this morning